This is Make It Mentionable. I'm Alyssa Patness, and this is the show about being human in a world that encourages us to be robots. I invite you to join me as we journey through the mess, the magic, and the mania in between, because what we can talk about, we can manage. This honest conversation extravaganza includes free-flowing conversations and high doses of vulnerability to remind you that you aren't alone. No topic is off limits, and episodes are designed to leave you smarter, aka more self-aware than when you came. I am so glad you're here. Welcome back to Make It Mentionable. Today I am here with Gail Wisner, and we are talking about relationships with men. And in a world where a lot of times, we're blaming the patriarchy, we're expecting more of men, we're talking about the things that influence relationships with men as a whole. So Gail, thank you so much for being here. I'm really excited to have this conversation with you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Can you let listeners/watchers know a little bit about you, who you are, what lights you up, what do you love?
Okay. Well, let's see if we can do that in a succinct manner, because I'm still multidimensional, so many different parts of me as there are with a lot of other people. So right now I'm a coach. I've done health coaching, business coaching, parenting coaching, relationship coaching, kind of all of it. And I guess the common thread is really transformational coaching, which is about transformation. That is what lights me up. I also, I'm a real estate agent and I do real estate. So they're both parts of my life. One is the cerebral, one is my heart, and both of them feed me and allow me to really connect and be of service to people, which is what really lights me up.
That's great. The world needs more of that. So I know a little bit of your story, and I want to fill people tuning in on that as well. So what about this transformational process, how did you get involved in it in the first place?
Yeah, a great question. So my childhood was very challenging. I grew up in an alcoholic home. My father was an alcoholic. There was a lot of chaos and drama, intense emotional and verbal abuse, and sometimes physical abuse too. And I'm also an incest survivor. My mother was pretty much emotionally absent completely, oftentimes physically absent because she couldn't handle my father. So she would run away to her mother and leave us with him. And she never touched me growing up. I got zero physical touch I was walking at 7 months. I was very early in everything. I was very verbal. By the time I was a year, I was talking. So once I was walking on my own, I don't remember her ever picking me up, touching me. No, I love you. Nothing. There was a distancing. I do suspect, I don't know, we've never talked about it, but I do suspect that she was sexually abused too, because I'm a strong believer, after the work I've done, that it's generational. And when we are sexually abused and we don't heal our own trauma, we pass it down to the next generation. And that is ultimately, I'll get to that, but that is ultimately what led me on a path of really healing. Because at the time when I started my healing, I didn't love myself. I hated myself. So why would I do all this work to heal myself? But when I learned and realized that I'm going to be passing this on, and do I want, my children? Well, I have one son, but I'm like, it could be my granddaughter. Do I want my granddaughter to be sexually abused because she doesn't know how to speak up and say no? And I said no. So I went on a path of healing, and it's been a long journey. I think I really started my healing journey in 2002 when I got divorced because I married somebody just as abusive as my father. And that's what we do. When we have abuse, unless we stop and really understand the dynamic and the pattern behind it, it is inevitable that we're just going to repeat it. And so it's been a long journey of understanding with love and compassion why I did what I did, not from a place of judgment, because in my experience, it doesn't work when we're judging ourselves or pushing ourselves to change so that we'll be loved. When it's for the wrong reasons, it just doesn't work. And so there were definitely times when it was for the wrong reasons and it always backfired. But ultimately, what I learned and what I believe in my entire, with every essence in my body is it doesn't matter what our background is. It doesn't matter how much trauma and abuse that we went through. We all have the power to transform. Mm-hmm. And yes, it's a lot of work. And yes, it takes time. And it's, and there'll always be remnants of it and triggers and stuff, but we can learn how to feel it, process it, let it go, and not get sucked into the same whirlwind and do the same thing and then wonder, oh my God, why am I a victim yet again? Mm-hmm. So that's been my path.
First, I thank you for sharing this, because there are so many women who have been through similar things but haven't found their voice yet, and they haven't felt like they've been able to talk about it. And there's power in not feeling alone. So thank you for being willing to share about your story. In furthering helping people not feel alone, what was you talked about judgment, and so in the self-judgment and healing, when we're healing, we have to get to this place where we're able to forgive ourselves and sort of approach things with more curiosity than just being so incredibly harsh on ourselves. But that can be difficult. There's a lot of intense emotion when you get to the point where you're actually able to heal. So growing up, what was your relationship with being able to express your emotions, and how did you manage the emotions that were present? Were you burying them down and then eventually they boiled up? What was your journey with that?
Okay, so I didn't even know what emotions were until, so the way I dealt with it, let's just say the way I dealt with it was through addiction. Addiction is a big part of my story. Alcohol, drugs, men, food, definitely food. I had, exercise bulimia, where I'd eat and work out for 4 hours because I tried to stick a toothbrush down my throat several times and it wouldn't work. So I found drugs so I didn't have to eat. So I got the drugs instead of the food. And, I grew up in a household where if you felt emotion and someone sensed you were vulnerable, you're dead. Like you're the target. You're the scapegoat now. You're going to get laughed at, put down. Like it wasn't safe to feel emotions. Nobody felt emotions in my house. So I learned, the first time I even knew what an emotion was and learned what an emotion was when the alcohol and drug use was out of control and I couldn't function, and I landed in AA. And, it was only when the addiction was down that I learned what a feeling was, and that I learned that it's really safe to feel your feelings. Feelings won't kill you. It doesn't matter what the feeling is. The feeling will never kill you, whether it's terror or rage, which I had a ton of both. It was like a ping pong ball. I'm either in a state of panic or I'm like going to kill anything and anyone. That was the state of my existence. And so, yeah, to answer your question, I didn't feel until I felt everything. And it was like, whoa. Yeah.
And then, so what was that process like then? Because if we go through massive amounts or very long periods of suppressing emotion, not being able to articulate it, it gets trapped in our body. You know, it's getting stored somewhere. And then we have this moment of being able to see and feel everything in a different way. It can also feel overwhelming. So what was your experience once the flood hit, where it was like, okay, oh, this is what emotions are and it's safe for me? How did that shift your trajectory?
Right. Well, in the beginning, I was like a raw nerve. I had to literally isolate myself from my entire family, from everything and everyone I knew. And I literally just sat in meetings, like 5 meetings a day. I just sat in meetings all day. Um, and then I actually ended up doing a 6 months outpatient program in a hospital because I had to be in a setting where I couldn't hurt myself,
Mm.
because that's also part of my story, where when the drugs were down, I just wanted to kill myself because I couldn't handle the emotions. They were too intense. So it was like a tsunami.
Mhm.
And, I cried, I made up for the entire time in my life when I didn't cry. I made up for it in like a couple months. So I cried, and I just had to, for me, I just needed to be in a very supportive environment. And then basically, once I stabilized, off the drugs, off the alcohol, off the binging and all that, once I stabilized and for 6 months got like intensive support, I was able to find a coach to be there for me, to help me transition back into life without the 24/7 support. Well, not literally 24/7, but like without the intensive support. And that is when I knew in my heart, I'm like, this is what I want to do. This
Mm.
is what I want to do, coaching, because I never realized how powerful coaching is. Now, obviously, some people don't need to be in an intensive setting for 6 months because it all depends on where you're coming from.
Mhm.
But I would never, ever be where I am today or have been able to slowly learn how to stand on my own feet, how to feel my emotions in my own apartment, because I didn't trust myself. I was afraid of myself.
Mhm.
And so for me, what helped, once the extreme part was over, was the constant coaching and, knowing that I have this person to talk to every week and that I can email her in between. And I've had various coaches throughout the year because I think we get different things from different people and at different stages in our life. But coaching, I would say, is what got me through up until today.
So I'm glad you brought up self-trust, because that is a thing that gets weakened in so many different types of relationships. And but whether we like it or not, other people have a lot of influence over us, especially when we're not in a place where we're designing our own thoughts, where we're taking full responsibility for our lives. And so you brought up self-trust and not being able to trust yourself, which is something that many people who have been through, almost any type of abuse, they bring up, where it's this: I no longer knew like what was mine. I didn't know what was theirs. I didn't know what was reasonable to ask for. I don't know how to trust myself anymore. And so for you, I'm assuming, given the nature of your story, that started young. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, I know for me that started when I was, when the sexual abuse started, which was when I was 11 years old, because and the confusion was, it was a family member, and so which I trusted completely and totally and loved and admired. So there's that part of like, here's this family member that I trust,
Mhm.
so they're older than me and everything, they must know what they're doing and they love me, so they would never hurt me, right? When you love someone, you don't hurt them. But then, you know um I believe that we're each born with an internal compass that knows right from wrong.
Mhm.
And deep inside, we know truth. Truth is embedded in us. We are born with truth. And so for me, the battle started with my body saying, this doesn't feel good emotionally. It just doesn't feel good. But another part of me says, oh, but this does feel good because I'm getting a lot of attention right now and I'm making somebody really happy right now. And I'm feeling really loved right now in this moment. And then there's huge, tremendous guilt and shame around that how am I feeling even a little bit good in a situation that is clearly not okay. So that's where the whole self-trust erodes, because of that inner turmoil. So that's where I believe it happened for me. And similarly with other abuse that wasn't sexual, but just, my dad belittling me or laughing at me of like, I love my dad and, he is so smart and he never makes mistakes. So if he's saying that something's wrong with me, he must be right. But my instinct says, I didn't do anything wrong. Why is he yelling at me? So you stop trusting yourself because you want to trust the authority figure because it's too scary. What am I, 9 years old and my dad's a piece of shit and now I got to figure out how I'm going to live life without, him on my own? That's too scary. So it's easier to negate your own beliefs and your own truth than to acknowledge that somebody else is just, uh, severely damaged,
Right. It becomes a survival mechanism. You're dependent on that person because you're a child, and so you have to find a way to cope and adapt in a way that makes sense of your world. And I want to mention that this lack of trust, and I think you explained how the erosion of it can happen really well, where we have this inner compass, as you said, this inner knowing, and it's piping up, it's having a voice, but it's in direct conflict with what we sort of know we need to survive and these other things that we want and desire. And that can happen. The example that you gave, even with how your dad talked to you, because that can happen, even without sexual abuse, this erosion of self-trust from the time we're younger. And I think that ultimately ends up shaping how we can relate to other people. How we relate to ourselves directly informs how we can relate to other people. So I want to talk a little bit about, like, obviously the relationship with your family member, the relationship with your dad, those had severely negative consequences, which is the most light version of saying that. But how did that influence your relationships with men in general when you were younger, other men in your life?
Yeah, in so many ways. So first of all, the messaging that I got was that in order for me to be loved, I need to not have any needs. I can't have needs if I want to be loved because it has to be all about the other person and their needs. My father was the ultimate narcissist. And so I invited narcissists into my life. And the part that I played in it was that in the very beginning, I allowed it to be all about them. What do you want to do? What do you need? Um, there was no me in the equation, and that's my part. I never asked for anything. And when, a guy would show up habitually late or cancel, I didn't speak up and say, hey, that's not okay. My time is valuable. Are you serious about this relationship or not? If you're not able to keep your commitments, that's okay, but you're not the right person for me. See, I wasn't able to say that. So the first thing was I had no needs. The second thing was, which was the biggest thing, is the word no wasn't in my vocabulary. It was, if I say no, he won't love me, and if he won't love me, then I'll be all alone and no one else is going to want to love me because I'm carrying so much shame around how I was treated growing up. So I had to hold on, to each relationship with dear life, because I just believed that each guy was the last guy that was ever going to love me. This is my last chance. So if I don't just submit to anything and everything, even if it went against my own values, you know, um, then I'd be alone. So there was that. And then there was also the other part was I did a lot of switching roles. I was the masculine instead of the feminine in so many of the relationships, where I did all the planning, because they were just lazy, like, we'll do this, this, and that. And then also I would be the one to always surprise them with a gift, or like be the thoughtful one to leave a note. So it was like I was doing all the work basically in the relationship. I was doing all the work. And and I wouldn't, you know I wouldn't just I've never been able to, like in the past, to just let go and see what happens. Like, if he doesn't call again, somebody else will. Somebody else will. I don't need to call him to show him I'm interested. If he's interested, he will call me and find out if I'm interested. So it's even those subtle things where, I showed my dependency and my neediness. And the only guys that are attracted to neediness are guys that want to take advantage of women. So, it was like I had it written all over my forehead: abuse me. I'm here for abuse, because I don't believe I'm worthy of more.
So that's a bold statement. And I've had experiences of being in some of the things you said in a less intense way, but some of the things where it's like doing everything possible because they're going to leave you if you don't. Never saying no, because if you say no, like, are they ever going to say yes to you? Or is it just going to be this perpetual gap in between that I'm eventually going to have to fill back up? And then similar to never being able to have needs and not knowing how to articulate a need or to say a want in a way that's really impactful. And so I think these are coping mechanisms that happen in many forms of how we've been searching for love, no matter how that was interrupted in the first place. With that, so you just said basically that these things, this lack of skill, this lack of self-worth, this lack of recognizing your own worth and your own value in the situation left you wide open for this type of abuse. Did I internalize that correctly?
Yes. Yes.
So the thing I want to distinguish here, because this is obviously it's so nuanced, and I mean those are the conversations that are worth having. So the nuance here to me is that you are very much a victim, but there's a difference between the facts of you being a victim and then you taking on victim consciousness and thinking that everything always has to happen to you. And so what I'm hearing is that in this, yes, you are absolutely a victim for a large portion of your life, but you had a choice around, okay, what role did I play? Because life isn't just happening to me all the time. What role did I play in this? And how can it's not even taking control, it's like taking charge. How can I take charge so that this pattern gets interrupted? Is that kind of the process that unfolded?
Yes, that is. And one of the things that I learned is that, at least for me, this is my experience, is that men treat me the way I treat me, and specifically my body, my emotions. Do I dismiss my emotions because I got to get this done and that done and I don't really have time to deal with it? So then you get a man who's inattentive to your needs, and he loves you, but he's just not attentive because he's busy doing stuff, because that's what I do to me. So what I learned, I mean, the thing that shifted for me completely was that I learned that the man in my life is just going to be a mirror. All he is a mirror. He cannot be any kinder or meaner to me than I am to myself. And if I want a man who's going to be kind and loving and affectionate and attentive and supportive and present and honoring of me wherever I am, in whatever moment I am, then that is what I need to be for me. Because we all radiate at a certain frequency, right? And that's just the way it is. And if you're if you're radiating at a really high frequency of 500 and you're in a state of love, you will never attract or spend more than 5 minutes with someone who's looking, just to sleep with you for the night. You won't even meet. And so I believe that the biggest way women can empower themselves is by loving themselves. It's that simple. The more you love yourself, the safer and more protected you will be with men.
I think it's so important because I had to get to the same point through very different circumstances, but there were relationships in there that were completely unhealthy and verbally abusive at times, never physically abusive. But in that, I spent years and thousands of dollars trying to fix myself. It was like, okay, like I have this person in front of me who is sending me this message that I'm broken and I'm throwing money at it. I'm going to sex therapy alone. I'm going to, a version of couples therapy alone, and nothing is changing. And so eventually I had to get to the point where it was like, no, like I have to accept myself. I have to fully accept myself where I am, because this endless trying to fix it is bypassing all of these things that were stored in me that needed to be accepted and to come out. So my experience has gotten me to the same conclusion that like the best thing we can do for ourselves is to truly love ourselves. The problem that comes in, or I guess it's the opportunity and the challenge that comes in, is that what the heck does that mean? When you start to get on that journey of like self-love, and we have all these messages on Instagram and Facebook of, oh, self-love is, self-care. And then all of a sudden you have a bunch of women taking bubble baths, but that's not helping you set better boundaries. That's not helping you say no more and to get in touch with your own desires, so that the next time someone asks you something, you're not like, we have that initial inner compass come up, but we shut it down and ask someone else for their opinion instead of trusting our own. Those are the things that are self-love. So how did you start to unpack and redefine what it was to love yourself?
Yeah, I think that is such an awesome question. And I love that you brought it up. I'm not against bubble baths, but to me, that is relaxation. That is a healthy escape from life, which we all need. And that is not what I define as love. I mean, it's a part of love, relaxation. So for me, what really, really works is I ask myself this every day, whenever I'm having a moment, is where's the pain? What's the pain? And that's how I love myself, is I go where the biggest pain is. So sometimes it's extreme anxiety about a certain situation, and the old me would ignore it, push it away, get busy, just like not deal with it, or I'm gonna go take a bubble bath and put on music, and like it's just gonna go away by itself. So wherever the pain is, that's where the love needs to be, because that's the only way we heal pain is through love. So if I'm feeling anxiety about a certain situation, then I stop. Number one for love, for me, number one is presence, being present with whatever is happening, because without presence, you can't make a conscious decision. Then you're always, if you're not present, you're always defaulting to an old pattern. That's just the way it's going to be. The only way to change a pattern is to get really present. So for me, the way I love myself is I learned the art of being incredibly uncomfortable and being okay with it, and asking myself. So for example, if let's just say I'm in pain because there's a hard conversation I need to be having with someone and I don't want to have it because I'm afraid of the consequences of it, then I stop. First, I acknowledge what's going on. And as soon as you acknowledge even what's going on and aware of what's happening, there's a shift that happens just from that, from not doing anything, but just saying, okay, this is what's happening. And then I stop and say, what tools do I have at my disposal? Do I need to write about it and journal so I can process how I'm going to deal with this? Maybe I need to call a friend and have someone just listen and have me talk through. Maybe I need a coaching session right now because this is a complicated relationship and it's important to me. But love is showing up for and dealing with everything that's causing us any kind of discomfort. And it's kind of like, being our own parent. If your child's in pain, you deal with the pain. Sometimes your child's in physical pain because they just fell and they have a bloody knee, and then you just need to get the first aid kit and maybe a hug. Sometimes they got into a huge fight with a best friend, and what they need is for you to sit down with them and help them process what happened. But that is what love is. Love is showing up for whatever is arising in the moment.
That's such a beautiful definition of love. And obviously, if I'm assuming many of the people watching this are in the self-help world, as so many of us are this day and age, whether it means it's your profession or if you've read the books on it. And there's so many ways to talk about love, and so many versions of that on the woo scale, as I'll say, and your definition here brings in so much of the practical wisdom, where it's about presence with the pain so that we can transform it. Like, we can't transmute something unless we've been able to sit with it and given it a voice and recognized, okay, here's where I'm at. And that's been a similar path for me as well. And I want to acknowledge for people that it's not easy. You and I are both coaches, and so we have a lot of tools at our disposal. And I know for me, at times, when we bump up against a boundary, when we bump up against something that like we really don't want to deal with, it can be hard. It can be hard to use the tools. Do you have the same experience?
Oh, absolutely. I'll be lying if I said that there wasn't resistance. And sometimes I have to be in discomfort for like a little bit. And I'm like, okay, I need to stop and deal with this. So it's not like the moment I have a feeling, I stop everything and I'm like, I'm here. It's usually, I mean, the way I notice it is I have, for me, very strong disciplines in my life that I implement. I train 3 hours a day religiously. I eat really healthy diet. I have impeccable boundaries with men, and so what happens is I have, showing up for work, for my, real estate work, because I have such a full life. I have a lot of disciplines to keep me structured because I work for myself. Nobody's on top of me. I live by myself. I work for myself. So I have a lot of discipline. So for me, the way I notice it, where something's off is if all of a sudden I don't want to do my discipline. Like all of a sudden, I don't want to work out today. I don't want to work out, or like, I don't want to eat a salad. Like, I just want ice cream, So like the minute, like, I'm off from the disciplines that were self-created. So they come from in me. Nobody put them on me. But they keep me in line. So when I'm out of alignment, I don't judge myself anymore. I have to say that this is something that took me years, but I'm in a place where I don't judge myself, but I stop and say, what's wrong? What's wrong? Why don't you want to do what you know you should be doing in order to get the results that you want to get? And then there's always some pain or grief or sadness or, fear that the future is going to be just like the past. So why should I bother putting in the effort? Because it's going to be just like it was before. And, whatever it was, the negative thinking. And I have to say, for me also, like, the most important thing I have to stand guard on more than anything else is my thinking, because everything starts with our thoughts. We don't, you can't pick up a drink without thinking first that you're going to take a drink and put it in your glass and drink it. And so it's a practice. It's not easy. I definitely miss thoughts, and that's what gets me, in a negative state, but I know how to get out of it very, very quickly. And that just comes from practice. That's just a skill you build over time. But the more you can think about what you're thinking, the easier it is not to get into negative patterns with yourself or with men.
I totally agree. And the other thing that has happened for me is, I've always been more intellectual. Like, one of my coping mechanisms was like, okay, be perfect, like get all the straight A's, like nobody can not like you if you're being the perfect one, which is such a joke and caused so many other issues. But part of that for me then was always being in my head. I was always in my head trying to solve the problem intellectually, trying to control my thoughts. And eventually I realized and then the cluster that is OCD entered my world. And that was a cosmic lesson in learning truly that I have to be okay with uncertainty. And the amount of reframing and reshaping thoughts I had to do after I was diagnosed with that, and still have to do, is bonkers and frustrating at times. But it's also been a great lesson because I started to realize how so much of my coping mechanism was to only be in my head. And the other thing that I had to do was learn how to be present with my body. And I learned, I had to go through this process of learning how I was making thoughts about physical sensations happening in my body. I was making meaning. If our heart starts racing, it could mean two things. It could mean we're excited, or it could mean, we're in terror and we're nervous. And there's a choice there around the meaning that gets made. But for me to get out of my head and start to integrate more of our senses of knowing, I had to develop an entirely new relationship with my body to be able to help me learn how to take charge of my thoughts better. And that process is ongoing. And the sitting in the discomfort, that what I've recognized, and I want to ask you if this has been your experience too. What I've recognized is that we have this baseline that we operate, and it might be, like an inch wide. And if we're willing to just go through life, go through the motions, we have some joyful moments, we have some sad moments, but we're not really exploring either end of those. So we end up living in this inch width. What I have found is that the more that I go deep into there are no bad emotions, but the more I go into the uncomfortable, the more negative emotions, the bigger that gap gets. Instead of it being an inch, it became 6 inches, and then it became a foot. And the amount of joy I experience on the flip side of that has also increased a ton. Do you have that same experience where when you have been able to go into the depths of what feels so dark, you also now have newfound levels of joy?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I believe that underneath all the pain is where the joy lies. And in order to access joy, you have to walk through the pain. Otherwise, why would we walk through pain? We wouldn't do it. And so if you have a level 10 pain, that means you're capable of a level 10 joy. But depth is depth, and it goes both ways. So the deeper you go into the pain, and I find that there's almost like a comfort level when you drop the resistance and you just let yourself cry it out and fall apart, and know that that's the self-trust that I could fall apart, I could cry on my floor, I could scream and yell at the top of my lungs, and yet I know I'll be able to put myself back together, and I will find joy again, and there will be beauty in life, even though I'm in the midst of a really dark moment. And the more you're able to be in that space of uncertainty, discomfort, despair, despondency, whatever it is, the more you can just be in it and you're not resisting it, you relax into it. It's like a relaxed state, and you're like, okay, this is what it feels like to feel absolute grief, absolute grief over how I lived and how I was. And just to let it take its natural course, but it subsides naturally. It always subsides. And the other thing I know, and this is my experience, is that our bodies will never allow us to feel what our psyches are not ready to experience. I had a lot of memories surface about my childhood only this year, because it was so intense that I wouldn't have known what to do with it. So we have built, and I want to say this so people aren't afraid to feel their emotions, because we have built in us an internal mechanism that wants to keep us safe. So if our mechanism feels that we're not ready to know certain things about our parents, or certain family secrets or whatever, if we're not psychologically ready, you won't get that memory. So you don't need to worry about, what if it's too much? The universe loves you and it wants to heal you. And so it's only going to give you as much as it knows you can handle. And that's when, that's a whole nother conversation, but that's where, for me, I found a spiritual practice, and I think that's really important. Whatever it is, it doesn't matter. I'm not attached. I have no monopoly on spirituality, but I really do believe that when a person can tap into something bigger and greater than themselves, whether they call it God or a higher power or a group or whatever, it's this feeling of, I don't need to do this alone. I don't need to do this alone, and I don't need to rely on my own strength, because to rely on my own strength, I'm really limited. But if I can tap into unseen energies that I believe are all around us, higher dimensions, if I can tap into them and have them, I ask them to hold space for me. Like when I'm going through something, before I allow myself to get into the depths of the emotions, first of all, logistically, I turn off my phone. Like I make sure there's nothing that I need to deal with, so that I don't, forget to pick up, forget that I have a client, so I also know how to manage my emotions, that even if I'm feeling a lot of intense emotions, if I have certain responsibilities that I have to take care of, I can acknowledge that there's stuff surfacing that needs to be dealt with. And I can just put it in a file and say, I'm not ignoring you, but I'm going to deal with whatever I need to deal with so I could be a functioning, healthy adult. And then when I've dealt with what I have to deal with, I can, take some really deep breaths and, get spiritually connected, so that I know, even though I'm physically alone, I'm not spiritually alone. And that's when I'm able to deal with the tsunami of whatever's coming up. It's like, all right, what's up now? And you just deal with it. And then it just naturally passes. And then there's just this feeling of absolute serenity and peace and joy. And it's like this feeling of, the universe is the parent I never had. And it is taking care of me and providing for me, if I can drop my resistance and not use and not go into addiction to disconnect from myself, which is what addiction is for me.
Right. I totally agree. And my form of addiction is the compulsive thoughts from OCD. And I had to learn a very similar lesson there. When those thoughts come up more, I am resisting something. And sometimes it takes a while for me to see what that is. And I want to touch on one other thing you said, because I think it's so important. Actually, two things. The first one is, I have a spiritual practice too, and we talk about spirituality here. I love translating things in the hyper spiritual world into the practical, and I think you've done so much of that in this conversation. One thing that helps me, because I've dated a lot of guys who are very new to spirituality, or they don't believe in it and they've never been religious. And so one of the things that helps me, in case there's anyone listening who has a hard time with that, is just thinking about like the same energy that makes up the trees is what makes up me. And, a plant doesn't have to prove anything.
Mm,
Even animals, like they're instinctual, and they know how to move throughout the world in basically a state of surrender to their instinct, because that's how they're going to get what they need. But the same energy that makes up like these trees that just blossom through the seasons is the same energy that makes up me. So who am I to think that I don't also have seasons and that I'm going to fluidly move through them as long as I'm nourishing myself? So that's how I kind of translate what you were talking about with being held by this universe, which I totally believe in a way that might, work for someone who isn't quite there yet, or who doesn't believe at that level. The other thing I wanted to touch on is or just retouch on, because you did it so well, is this notion that we're not going to be given more than we can handle. And I think there's something you shared, that you've had new memories come up even this past year. And this is something that has happened for me as well. There's something that in the past year just has come out randomly. I've always had a relationship with terror that I don't fully understand. And in different trainings and in different work with coaches, like that word has always come up, and I never fully understood it. And I started just allowing for it. I didn't need to understand it. I just started allowing for it. And then really weird things started happening. Like I would cry after sex randomly, or not wanting to be touched in a certain way, or just having this weird feeling that I couldn't describe in particular places. And that has been intense, but I share that only because I want to echo that we're not going to be shown more than we can handle. And if we can allow the pieces of information that come up, and without judgment, that's the key part. Like I haven't judged when those moments come up. I haven't judged myself for bawling my eyes out after, amazing sex. And so then it allows us to process that information in a new way. I think there's this assumption, especially in the hyper intellectual world that we live in, that we have to understand everything, and that we have to know it intellectually and know why and understand every piece of it. But sometimes the processing of trauma can happen through our bodies, and then we get to a place where we feel safer and can show more. So I know that was long-winded, but I had to echo that because I think it's so, so, so important, because it can be scary as all get out to embark on the healing journey.
yeah, and it's interesting what you just shared about, crying after sex. That can be, when you have a really positive experience and feel loved and safe and supported, then you're able to cry because of all the fear that you experienced for so many years of not feeling loved, and that's for me. When I had terror, I can't speak for your terror, but I struggled with terror my entire life. And for me, that was fear of not being loved. All of my terror came down to one thing, that there is a fear I won't be loved. And when you experience love, sex isn't necessarily love. Obviously, you can have sex in a situation where there's no love, but when you have sex in a situation where you're actually loved and cared for, and everything is in the body, and you're having an experience of what it's like to be nurtured, and contained and held, then it's so natural that all the tears would just shed of like the anxiety of not being loved. So that I look at it as a really positive thing, because clearly there has to be a trust with your partner. If you can fall apart and cry, you're not going to fall apart and cry in a one night stand, so that's it's uncomfortable, but it's a good thing.
I 100% agree. And it's interesting because, I talk to a lot of women, and and when things like this happen, we have this instinct of like, oh my God, something has to be wrong. And so they can start to freak out around like, wait, I thought I was in this amazing relationship, but this is happening. And now it feels like something's wrong. And then we start looking for the things that are wrong when really it can be exactly what you just said. When we start to see ourselves differently and can hold that space for ourselves, we attract a different level of partner. And then that safety that is established can hold space for emotion in an entirely different way. And so it actually is this very beautiful thing. I love that you brought that around, because I've been told that by numerous women and have definitely started to see how that's true in my own life. But it's important to recognize that when we feel safe after years and years and years of not feeling safe or not feeling like we're able to be loved, that alone can push us into more discomfort at first. So we've covered a lot of things in this conversation, and I want to, for anyone who has been through something that just feels like it's not manageable, or it's terrifying to go into, or it's overwhelming to start healing. The thing that shifted for me is when I started making healing a lifestyle. But one of the questions that came up along the way is, who the hell am I to take time to heal? And you mentioned that you put stuff in a file. It's like, okay, put it in a file over here, and now I can go handle the things that I need to handle for the day. But what would you say to someone who might be asking, like, who am I to take the time to heal? They have so many responsibilities. They have numerous kids. They feel like, their job's going to fall apart if they're not super present there. What would you say to them?
Yeah, well, I would say, who are you not to take the time to heal? When we self-deprecate and make ourselves small, that's no different to me than someone going into grandiosity. You're a child of God. That's who you are. And every single person that you are connected with, from your colleagues at work to your children in your household to your partner, are deeply affected by your healing or not healing.
Mhm.
So when parents especially use the excuse of, well, I got to take care of my kids, there is no better way for you to take care of your kids than your healing. Because guess what? You can hire a cleaning woman to wash your floors, and you can hire a chef or buy takeout to cook your food. You cannot hire anyone to do your healing. And I understand the resistance, because I had the same thing. And I also, the ultimate shift for me was seeing how massively my life shifted when I did my healing work. When you start to see the results, you're like this is my lifestyle. Just like, going to the gym is my lifestyle. I will continue to do it. And so with healing, it literally affects everyone you're energetically connected with. And so that helped me a lot. I went into recovery for my son. I have one son, and I was throwing temper tantrums at him when he left toys on the floor. And I experienced so much shame. I'm like, what am I doing? He's 7 years old and he left toys on the floor. That's what 7-year-olds do. Am I going to be the same? Am I going to be my dad the way my dad was to him? And so it was out of love for my son that I went on the healing journey. Today, I continue it regardless of him, because today I do love myself enough to continue on this path. But at the time I didn't. So what I would say to people who are new is, think of the people you love and do it for them until you're able to do it for yourself.
There's so much power in being able to borrow beliefs from other people at times, being able to borrow like their hope in us when we don't quite have it in ourselves. So I love that advice. I think the only other thing for me that I would add is in this world where productivity takes center stage and that seems to be the thing that you're rewarded for, I had to redefine what productivity meant, because I learned that I was way more productive when I had prioritized the healing. And so there are absolutely times where it comes up and it is so inconvenient. It's just like, seriously, right now is when you have to choose to come up. And then
Yeah.
I have to forgive myself and be compassionate and be like, okay, I hear you. And I know you need a voice. And so, yeah, we got to put that aside for like, I don't know, 20 minutes. Sometimes it's a few hours. Sometimes it's like, I will get to you this weekend, but you're here and I'm holding a space for you. And I do really write it down. Like I physically write it down or type it. I have a file where I store like things I'm working on or patterns that keep coming up, because when we ignore them, they're just going to find a more disruptive way to come up. And so I learned that ultimately my productivity is way better when I prioritize the stuff that's bubbling to the surface.
Yeah, and I just want to add to that is another reason why I think coaching is crucial, because there's continuity. So when you have a session every single week and you're working on something, you know that someone's holding space for you. Even obviously we hold space for our clients even when we're not in session with them, right? We're still always connected. And when you have a coach, you just show up, a lot more. And I think that is really important always, but especially in the beginning when you need that extra motivation and, support, because yeah, healing work is hard. It's freaking hard work.
And at first,
That's it. It just is.
It is. And at first, it doesn't always feel safe, which I think is the other thing that's important to mention there. Like it doesn't, we've talked about safety this entire time because so much of your journey has had to be establishing safety within yourself and then being able to afford that to yourself, this gift that you're not given as a child. And so healing work, though, it doesn't always feel safe at first because it's doing something new. And so we can hit a boundary or we can come up to some resistance and definitely not want to say yes to going into it. And so that's the other value, I think, of coaching too, is it's someone can hold that container even and allow for safety when it doesn't yet feel safe. And so if someone who is listening is struggling with, I don't know how to dive into this and it feels hard to do alone, it might be for that reason alone, is that it's pushing you out of your comfort zone and it might not feel safe yet. And there's power in being in community with people who are choosing that as a lifestyle and who are doing it routinely and who can hold space for you as well. So, Gail, I just want to wrap with it's a big question, but I think it's one that helps paint the picture of what changes. So we've been talking about relationship with men. We've been talking about how we play a role in our relationship with men and how we're treated, which is never to say that we deserve to be mistreated, but we do have a role in how we allow ourselves to be treated. And obviously that's nuanced, but I want to ask, like, what is your relationship with men now? You've given us snippets where you have amazing boundaries and it sounds like you have a good relationship with your son, but what has changed? What is the relationship with men like now?
Right. Well, I went from hating men to loving men. I actually love men now, and I'm able to see the goodness in them. I do think that men are ultimately really good and they want to please women. They actually really want to please women. They actually really want to take care of women and make them feel safe and secure and make them feel good. And they actually want to give to women. But the hardest part for me is being open to receiving, because my receiving door was closed. And so I attracted men who wouldn't give to me, because receiving, you're in a vulnerable state. When you receive, you're vulnerable. And now, do I owe something to him? You know, if I receive a dinner, does that mean I have to sleep with him tonight? You know, and so my relationship with men is just to see the goodness in them. I currently don't have a boyfriend. I'm not in a relationship. I'm open to one, and I'm, but I'm incredibly okay on my own, which is great. And I also really love and enjoy men. I have male friends, and I feel safe with men. I think that's really like the ultimate difference is I feel very, very safe with men. I don't feel afraid when I'm with men. They're just human beings, just like me.
That's powerful, especially for anyone who has experienced, something where you don't feel safe around them. That's powerful to hear. So thank you so much for being willing to have this conversation and for sharing parts of your story with us. If people want to connect with you, what is the best way for them to do so?
The best way would probably just be to email me at Gail, Gail, at gailwisner.com, which is GailWisner.com. You can also go to my website, gailwisner.com, but I would say email is probably the best way to connect.
Awesome. We will link that in the show notes, in the post, all over the place as well. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
You've just finished listening to another episode of Make It Mentionable with me, your host, Alyssa Patmos. If you're looking for more in between episodes, then sign up for The Peel. It's my free newsletter that gives tips for how to navigate whatever life dishes. And it's also the place where I share the juiciest of stories. To check it out, head on over to alyssapatmos.com/The Peel. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.